Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I, Lieutenant General Gautam Murthy, founder and director CASA, on behalf of Team CASA, welcome you to the 31st CASA webinar, the fourth and the final one in our cybersecurity series on this very special eve of our 75th Independence Day, Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. The overall objective of this webinar series, which has been spaced over 4 episodes, a fortnight apart, is to review cyberspace strategies and capabilities of major world powers, compare these with the status in India, and draw some useful lessons. In our first episode held on 3rd July, we had 3 eminent speakers, one of whom was Lieutenant General Rajesh Pant, PVSM, AVSM, BSM retired, the National Cyber Security Coordinator in the Prime Minister's Office. In that episode, we reviewed the cybersecurity capabilities of major players, their strategies and structures, and compared them with that of India's. We had also looked into the merits and demerits of adopting an offensive defense stance in cyberspace and the need of developing offensive cyber capabilities accordingly. In the second episode, held on 17 July 22, we had the former DGMO, Lieutenant General P.R. Kumar, the additional DGP Maharashtra, Mr. Brijesh Singh, and a foremost cybersecurity expert in the country, Mr. Jiten Jain, who discussed the governance architecture to defend India's national cyberspace and spoke about how to strike the right balance among the charters of major organizations involved in the defense of national cyberspace, namely the MOD, the Armed Forces, MEA, external agencies, MHA, and the private sector. Whether the MOD or the Armed Forces should play a pivotal role in the defense of national cyberspace, with perhaps an exclusive charter for offensive cyber operations in sync with the role with traditional domains of land, sea, and air was also discussed. In our third episode, held 2 weeks ago on 31st July, we discussed national strategy and structures for cyber influence operations. We had Lieutenant General Raj Shukla, a former GOC-INC Army Training Command, who spoke to us on cyber influence capabilities and operations of China and Russia, recommendations for India, and then again we had Mr. Jain, who spoke to us about cyber espionage, existing and recommended charter for MEA and NTRO, and recommendations for national governance architecture. Our third speaker at our last webinar was Lieutenant General PJS Pannu, former Deputy CIDS, who covered cyber influence capabilities and operations of Pakistan, ISI, and recommendations for India. In today's webinar, we shall discuss the role of the armed forces in cyber operations. We shall discuss the differences and overlaps between cyber operations as a part of gray zone warfare and those carried out in support of military operations. We shall also brainstorm the recommended role of the armed forces in cyber operations, offensive as well as in cyber influence operations, and recommend organizational structures to be raised and development of cadre and skills to be undertaken for the fulfilling of this role. To take us through this, we have a very eminent panel. Our first speaker is Major General Suresh Menon, an officer from the Corps of Signals. He's done the technical staff course at IIT Pune and the higher command course at the Army War College, Mao, and attended the NDC at New Delhi. A pioneer in the field of electronic warfare systems in the Indian Army, the general officer has undergone training in Hungary, Russia, and Israel in EW systems and concepts. The general officer has commanded a signal unit in the Northeast and a tri-service intelligence unit in the capital. The officer was also chief signal officer in an operational corps in the northern region and the chief signal officer in the Southwest Command. During his long and distinguished career, the general has held important and sensitive appointments in the Army headquarters at the tri-service level. As Commander Army Cyber Group, the general has made invaluable contribution in making a robust cyber defense for the Army, exclusive networks and devices through implementation of sound cybersecurity policy in line with the national directives on the subject. The general was awarded the Vishesh Seva Medal for his professional competence in the fields of IT and cyber domain. We welcome you, General Menon, and we look forward to your views on the role of the Indian Army in cybersecurity operations. Our next speaker is Air Vice Marshal Makaran Ranade, AVSM VM, an alumnus of the National Defense Academy and was commissioned into the fighter stream of the Air Force in 6 December 1986. He has more than 2,500 hours of flying experience as a fighter combat leader has undergone the Air Staff course at Collège Inter-Armée de Défense in Paris, and is an alumnus of the National Defense College, New Delhi. The air officer has commanded 2 fighter bases, an advanced headquarters, a MiG-21 squadron, and has been the chief operational officer of a fighter base. He also served as directing staff at Tactics and Air Combat Development Establishment and the Defense Services Staff College. He served as an air attaché in the Embassy of India in Kabul and has tenanted the appointments of Principal Director, Directorate of Air Staff Inspection and Director Personnel Officers at Air Headquarters. The air officer is currently posted as Assistant Chief of Air Staff Operations Space in Air Headquarters, where he oversees the cyberspace aspects for the IF. He is a recipient of the AVSM and the Vayu Sena Medal Gallantry and has been commended by the Chief of Air Staff and the Air Officer Commanding-in-Chief, Western Air Command. We welcome you, Air Vice Marshal Ranade, and look forward to hearing your views. Our third panelist is Commodore MP Anil Kumar, Nausena Medal, who was commissioned into the executive branch of the Indian Navy on 1st July 1988. He is a specialist in signal communications and electronic warfare and has commanded the Indian naval ships Ajay, Gharyal, Rajput, and Ranjit. He was Principal Director, Network-Centric Operations at Naval Headquarters in 2011-12 and Commodore Information Warfare and Chief Information Security Officer for 6 years, up to 2020. The officer is a certified information system security professional and offensive security certified professional. He holds global information assurance certifications in penetration testing, exploit research, malware, reverse engineering, and industrial control system security. He is also a member of the GIAC Advisory Board since 2015. He was awarded the Nausena Medal in 2020 for his contributions to cybersecurity of the Indian Navy. We welcome you and Commodore Anil Kumar, and we look forward to hearing your views. A moderator for this webinar is Lieutenant General R.S. Panwar, AVSM, SM, VSM, who retired after 40 years of service, mainly in the Corps of Signals. His last appointment was Commandant MCTE MAO, which carries out training, as you all know, of officers and soldiers in the fields of ICT, electronic warfare, cyber operations, and is also the designated Center of Excellence for the Indian Army for these disciplines. The General holds MTech and PhD degrees in Computer Science and Engineering from IIT Bombay, as well as a Master of Management Studies degree from Osmania University. He has attended the National Security and Strategic Studies course at the NDC and also a special one-semester cryptology course at IIT Delhi. He is credited with implementing several enhancements to the Indian Army networks towards ushering in a network-centric era in the highly active operational environment of J&K, and also for evolving organizational restructuring models as a part of the Army transformation studies. The General Officer is a recipient of several awards by the President for Distinguished Services in the Defense Forces, and has also been awarded by the Department of Defense Production for R&D work. Last year, he was conferred with the coveted Distinguished Alumnus Award by IIT Bombay, the only defense officer to hold such an honor for services rendered in uniform. We welcome General Panwar, and without further ado, it is over to you for the conduct of the webinar. Over to you, General Panwar.
Thank you, General Murthy. At the outset, I would like to thank General Murthy as well as Kasif for giving me this privilege to conduct this series of 4 cyber operation webinars on cyber operations. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm very happy to come to this culminating episode, which is, as already brought out, is to deal with the role of the armed forces in cyber operations. Now, this webinar series was conceived to focus primarily on offensive cyber operations and cyber influence operations. And in the previous 3 episodes, we have had several eminent speakers, as brought out, who gave out their views and insights on these 2 facets of cyberspace operations. Now, the objective of today's episode, taking off from what General Murthy said, is to deliberate on the role of armed forces in successfully executing strategic conflicts in cyberspace and how to carry out capability development for this role. There are many facets to warfighting in cyberspace, which may broadly be classified under 3 heads. Firstly, cyber deterrence / offensive capability. Secondly, cyber defense, that is protection of our critical infrastructure, including military assets, against cyber attacks by adversaries. And thirdly, cyber influence operations. In order to have a useful discussion in the limited time available, I hope to steer the discussion mostly around aspects related to offensive cyber operations. So before I throw open the floor to our eminent panelists, all with, as you've heard, superlative cyber profiles, let me try and set the backdrop for the discussions. The term offensive cyber operations may be interpreted in various ways. In its broadest sense, it may be taken to mean all types of cyber attacks, including, for example, cyber crime and cyber espionage, both strategic and industrial. But for the purpose of this discussion, however, offensive cyber operations should be understood as operations which create disruptive or destructive effects on the adversary's critical infrastructure. And cybercrime and espionage are excluded from their scope. The following question also comes up. Under what circumstances would any nation go in for destruction of an adversary's critical infrastructure? In my view, the justification for such an action emerges from the principles of jus in bellum and regulated by jus in bello. In other words, all enemy assets which would be valid targets for destruction using kinetic means in times of war may also be justifiably targeted using cyber weapons. And this targeting must adhere to the principles of international humanitarian law, in particular the principles of distinction, proportionality, and military necessity. Now, coming to the theme of this episode, that is the role of the armed forces in offensive cyber operations. It was brought out in previous episodes that agencies in India which execute offensive cyber operations include the NTRO, the DRDO, and the armed forces, in addition to non-state actors. There appeared to be some consensus that destructive cyber operations should perhaps be the exclusive domain of the armed forces, though there were alternate views also. My own view on the distribution of responsibilities for cyberspace operations is based on a simple guiding rationale. Align mandates in cyberspace with existing charters in the physical domain. Thus, since destruction of adversary assets using kinetic weapons in the physical domains is clearly the charter of the armed forces, this charter should extend to cyberspace as well. Next, since espionage is the domain of external intelligence agencies, that is RAW and TRO, in cyberspace, this mandate translates to cyber espionage. As regards the DRDO, being an R&D organization, its role in cyberspace must focus on development of cyber training ranges and weapons in support of cyber operations. Finally, physical protection of our own critical infrastructure, being an internal security matter, is the responsibility of the Ministry of Home Affairs, and thus MHA should take on the responsibility and also be accountable for protecting our critical infrastructure against cyber attacks in collaboration with the private sector. The justification for conducting offensive operations against another sovereign state by the armed forces is rooted in Article 51 of the UN Charter, which provides for the right to self-defense. This mandate, however, becomes operative only beyond what is known as the threshold of armed conflict. Given the unique characteristics of cyberspace, primarily the ability to carry out cyber attacks remotely, together with the difficulty of attribution in cyberspace, it is possible for adversaries to achieve strategic effects through cyberspace even below the threshold of armed conflict, in the so-called gray zone. Since applicability of international law in cyberspace, especially in the gray zone, is still quite unclear, from a legal perspective, cyberspace is actually akin to the Wild West. Thus, the issue of giving the mandate for conducting cyber attacks in the gray zone to any agency warrants careful deliberation. In my view, offensive cyber operations across the spectrum of conflict must be conducted under the control of the armed forces. At the same time, services of non-state actors may be requisitioned on need basis in order to maintain plausible deniability. Now, coming to structure and capabilities, the Defense Cyber Agency was established in 2019, as we all know, with the primary mandate of executing offensive cyber operations from a military perspective. In my view, its current establishment is too small as compared to the PLA Strategic Support Force and other assets available to our primary adversary, namely China. This view finds endorsement in the Harvard Welfare National Cyber Power Index of 2020, which compares 30 prospective cyber powers, wherein under the offensive cyber capability parameter, China ranks at number 4, while India is at serial 28, the first three being US, Russia, UK, and Russia. So number 4 and serial 28 is where China and India respectively stand. Thus, India needs to upgrade the Defense Cyber Agency to a full-fledged tri-services cyber command at the earliest, with a strength in the range of 5,000 personnel or more. This is my personal view. Coming to capability development, it is evident that existing HR policies in all the three services are not adequately suited for raising a highly specialized cadre of this magnitude. In fact, there is a conviction in certain quarters that the armed forces may never be able to set up such a cyber force. As opposed to this view, we know that the US set up its cyber command with an initial sanctioned strength of 6,400 personnel, which has been enhanced subsequently. China has created the formidable PLA Strategic Support Force. The UK, in addition to the GCHQ, has now set up a national cyber force. Russia arguably possesses the world's most effective cyber warfighting potential within its GRU. All of these are military organizations. I believe that capability development for setting up a full-fledged cyber command by the armed forces is very much feasible, but entails transformative changes in HR policies, including by tapping expertise available in the CV street, at least in the initial phases. The skill development model which best suits the Indian context, therefore, needs to be evolved. Another important consideration is that in the physical domains, preparation for war does not entail violation of sovereignty of the adversary state before the breakout of conflict. On the other hand, given the nature of cyber weapons, covert operations prior to an all-out conflict are an essential prerequisite for the effective conduct of offensive cyber operations. With that as a backdrop, this episode seeks answers to the following key questions. Are the armed forces the best suited agency to conduct offensive cyber operations through cyberspace during all-out conflicts as part of multi-domain operations? If not, how should this charter be allocated? Assuming that a cyber command with several thousand personnel is to be raised, how should the armed forces go about recruiting and training such a cyber force? Any views on cyber influence operations, which is a slightly different field, are also most welcome. With that, I request the tri-service panel of experts to provide the views and insights which might help to answer these questions, especially alternative views to the perspective presented by me. Now I hand over the floor to General Menon. General Menon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. At the very outset, I wish to thank CASA, the premium organization involved in the strategic affairs, for inviting me to this webinar and giving me an opportunity to air my views on a contemporary subject, cyberspace operations in the role of armed forces. And the mandate given to me is to cover the issues with special reference to the ground forces, that's the Indian Army. My greetings also to my fellow panelists from Indian Air Force and Indian Navy. My greetings also to my mentor and moderator for this webinar today, General R.S. Pandey. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I've been allotted 12 minutes. I think I should be able to do justice to the topic within this allotted time frame. It's important to understand that in any future conflict, the kinetic and the non-kinetic environments will become more blurred. And in many scenarios, they tend to merge further. Today, almost everything is digitally interconnected, and hence cyber domain will become more complex, and relevance of cyber operations would exist in the gray zone too. A gray zone is space between the peacetime and just short of war. Here, the state and non-state actors participate. They initiate their actions in a very cohesive nature. This leads to an important question, that is there any overlap or differences exist in the conduct of cyber operations during the gray zone and in support of military operations? I wish to analyze this taking into account the cyber defense preparedness of the nation and the nation's approach to cyber-enabled operations. A lot has been spoken about the cybersecurity by many speakers during the previous series of this webinar. They covered the existing cybersecurity policy, its implementation, the monitoring procedures, redundancy incorporated in the networks, so on and so forth. All these measures give us adequate confidence in our cyber defense preparedness, but a word of caution, we should not allow complacency to set in here, and if it happens, it'll be our doomsday. But when it comes to the cyber-enabled operations, that is the projection of the cyber power as an instrument towards national security, not much is spoken about. Neither not much is available in the open domain, rightly so, the subject being classified in nature. So when we talk about cyber offensive capabilities of countries like China, North Korea, United States, UK, Israel, these capabilities are generally inferred from their demonstrated performance in peacetime or in no peace, or for that matter, heightened tension period, just short of war. But the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict provided us a great insight into the destructive and influential capabilities of cyber power in support of the military operations. I would recommend a Google search on the subject. Will surprise you with details of cyber influential and cyber destructive operations in a chronological order, that the target selected, the time of attack, effect on the target. We may not fully subscribe to this report, but certainly we can conclude that the cyber offensive operations had an impact on the ongoing conflict. Therefore, during conflict, the potential adversaries would initiate actions to disrupt the CII, paralyze the C4ISR systems, influence the minds of the leaders and the military commanders, taking cyber operations in the neocortical domain. Some of these actions would commence much before the commencement of the actual combat on ground. A reality check on the cyber defensive preparations, one can presumably assume that adequate security measures are in place at national and at the regional level. A comprehensive cybersecurity policy exists, backed by an effective organizational structure and a skilled human resources. But in my opinion, this approach alone would not work. Still, we can be subjected to cyber attack. Hence, the need for a renewed strategy. Maybe we have to adopt a policy which enunciate cyber power to be used in an offensive role. At the national level, to wage cyber offensive operations, one must build the capabilities, one must have the capacity and demonstrate the offensive capabilities too. So while we ensure strong cyber defense in all our networks and digital assets, we must also be prepared to launch a cyber-enabled operations. Then this effort must go concurrently. The above arguments raise three fundamental questions. Firstly, is our national cyber security policy of 2013 to cover all aspects of cyber operations? Secondly, is cyber offensive operation an option to be considered during military operations? Thirdly, if that be so, are we prepared for it? Let me tackle these one by one. The national cybersecurity policy enunciated in the year 2013 considered adequate in the cybersecurity measures. In our country, we have so many stakeholders working in the cyber domain, starting with CERT India, NTRO, RAW, IB, CDAC, various ministries, defense forces, NIC, NASCOM, the private companies. Each has got a specific role to play and they have a mandate to perform. They have the organizational structure and they have the staff and equipment to do so. But the policy, however, is vague on use of cyber power in offensive role. This necessitates a detailed deliberations at the highest level. As part of the cyber offensive strategy, I wish to count three scenarios before you. Count one, the proactive scenario. An impending cyber attack threatens a nation and its infrastructure, digital infrastructure. In such a scenario, should we wait for the attack to happen? Or perhaps one could adopt a stance of cyber deterrence, a demonstrated effort to prevent adversary launching an attack. Second scenario, the counterattack scenario, where the situation where the nation has already suffered a cyber attack. And the third scenario could be launch cyber attack in conjunction with the conventional operations when the national security is jeopardized. In all the above scenarios, the process involved, there's some contribution from certain key elements. Firstly, the strategists or the planners. These are the people who analyze the threat and suggest whether response in cyberspace is needed or not. Intelligence agencies, they gather intelligence about the targets, profile the targets, and this will be an ongoing process like any in-collection plan. And this need to be undertaken well in advance. And this activity also comes under the realm of the cyber espionage. Frequently comes under severe criticism in the international arena. We have the coordinating agencies who would analyze the plan, coordinate the and optimize the resources available. They conduct mock drill if required. We have the R&D agencies who develop the cyber weapons and also the mode of delivery. Then finally, the executing agencies who executes the plan and also at times profile the damage assessment. In all the above processes, it can be well assumed that the armed forces do have a role to play and therefore must be integrated at each stage with a view to achieve the common security objective. Russia-Ukraine conflict demonstrated the type of targets which can be subjected to cyber attacks in a combat zone. This is applicable to any nation. Maybe the operational situation might change, the time-space domain might change. The target list would include both at the strategic level and also at the tactical level. The strategic level targets should have a high impact, it should have a devastating effect, should influence both physical and psychological domains. The cyber weapons needed for this should be highly sophisticated, maybe a one-time use. Delivery platform needs to be highly innovative. They need to have adequate preparation and credible intelligence to prepare for this sort of venture. Also, one must plan for countermeasures to our own system. Why? Because when a strategic level target is targeted, it could invite counterattack by the adversaries also. At the tactical level, I would say that the military systems usually would be a closed network. However, during conflict or just short of war, we will have the integration with the civilian networks. And here the vulnerability would be there. And this can be exploited. And even there are people who would be exploiting the weapon platforms by using a penetration systems or penetration methods. And at the device level, through exploits, targeting even the supply chain vulnerabilities. So it is easy. Excuse me. So some of the targets which the Russians on the ongoing conflict, as reported by many cyber experts, include: they have gained access to the Ukrainian file sharing systems, government file sharing systems, the telecom networks, attack against the satellite networks, and national post service and banking networks. So this attack has been across the spectrum, starting from the civil right up to the military domain. So cyber offensive operations is definitely an option which needs to be exercised in support of the military operations, according to me. Services has a key role to play in conduct of the cyber-enabled operations. Perhaps they must assume the role of a leading agency to respond to any cyber attack through offensive means in a conflict scenario. That brings to the third question: are we prepared for it? If we want to achieve the desired end result, we must have an unambiguous policy with effective legal framework. The rules of engagement must be clearly spelled out, as there are many agencies involved in the cyber domain. This would dictate whether the whole process needs to be centralized or centralized control and decentralized execution. That's a point which I would like to mention out here. The organization structure, the Defense Cyber Agency under MOD, be the nodal agency for all cyber-related activities with respect to the three services. DCA could be an interim method required to be upgraded to Cyber Command on an urgent basis. DCA can work in very close coordination with the National Security Council Secretariat under NSA. The service-specific cyber offensive units to work at the formation level. Cyber weapons be developed by the DRDO, but I would also recommend to establish an advanced technical R&D facility or a center of excellence at the service headquarters, primarily with the aim of in support of the waging cyber-enabled offensive operations by the services. You require a highly skilled HR. The upgradation of the existing Army cyber group at Army headquarters level to meet the cyber challenges in both defensive and offensive field is strongly recommended. A few challenges one would likely to encounter while embarking into cyber offensive posture would be, as I've already mentioned, a lot of in-collection pertaining to the selected targets would be required. This activity needs to be carried out even during the gray zone. The in-collection work on chosen cyber targets will alert the network admin, thus drying up the int sources as such. Hence, the chosen time would be highly critical. This will persuade adversaries to adopt countermeasures at an early stage. From an R&D point of view, inventing a high technical tools for exploitation need to be developed. The maintenance of this secrecy of this weapon system also is an issue which needs to be tackled at the highest level. But these challenges can be met through sound leadership, effective policy on ground, and a possible time frame for implementation. Before I conclude, I would like to borrow a remark made by General Raj Shukla, the former Army commander, during the previous session of this webinar series. That is, I quote, "It's certainly not the tradecraft, but the statecraft displayed by a nation make a cyberspace operations a success," unquote. Thank you and Jai Hind.
Thank you, General Menon. You have in fact completed before time, I would say, which is not the norm. It is a statistical outlier as far as these 4 webinars go. And I'll take this time which we have saved in highlighting some of the important points which you have brought out during these 10 minutes. Firstly, the importance of drawing lessons from the Ukraine war. In fact, the Ukraine conflict, Russia conflict, has been considered as the first global cyber war. And there are many quarters which are sort of drawing a lesson that not enough has been done in the cyber domain. I mean, what was expected, it is much less than that. But a closer scrutiny of aspects which are reports which are now coming out, as that it has had a reasonably major role to play, and maybe much more would happen in wars of this type. We must also keep in mind that the cyber as a warfighting domain is just about 10 to 15 years old, and we have to plan for what is going to happen over the next 10 to 20 years. The requirement of a cyber strategy, which includes full spectrum cyber operations and covers all aspects, has been brought up by you. And the aspect of, if we have a proper strategy for offensive cyber operations within the armed forces, the requirement for centralized control and decentralized execution is a very important aspect. And of course, you have given a recommendation for, in addition to the DRDO developing cyber ranges and tools, to have such a R&D facility service-wise also. So these are only some of the aspects. I think it was a very comprehensive and very informative talk which you gave. I now hand over the floor to Air Vice Marshal Ranade. Over to you, AVM Ranade.
Thank you, sir. Just give me a moment. I'll just upload my presentation.
Sure.
And I hope the presentation is visible, sir.
Is it?
Yes, sir. Go ahead, AVM Ranade. It's clear.
Okay, sir. So good evening to all the participants of this webinar. I will start by thanking CASA, General Murthy and General Panwar for giving me this opportunity to be here this evening and sharing my thoughts along with the luminaries in this field. As a serving officer, it puts me under a certain amount of constraints.
Sorry to interrupt, AVM Ranade. Sorry, I'm
Sir.
just seeing the community, the Zoom screen is seen, not the presentation. Do you want to open up the presentation there?
Just a moment, sir. Just give me a moment.
Sure. I think it picked up the wrong screen. It just picked up your Zoom sign.
Yes, sir. Can you see the presentation now?
Now it's there.
Yep. You could put it into the Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Fine, sir. So as I was saying, since as a serving officer, it puts me under a certain amount of pressure because I cannot really openly commit to certain information which otherwise, as a veteran, I would be very easily be happy to share. But that notwithstanding, I'm very happy to be here and sharing my thoughts on what the topic has elaborately been talked about. We are all aware that it's cyber operations is a very important activity nowadays. It's a subset of the multi-domain operations, and it resides with land, sea, air, space operations which are conducted, both defensive and offensive component. Today, we are specifically talking about the offensive component. And what is important when we talk about the offensive component is that there are no boundaries. Unlike a physical battle which will happen, there are no boundaries here. There are no timelines. So when we talk about gray zone, we are already at cyber war with anybody whom we want, and they are already at war in the cyber domain with us. We are all aware of what our northern adversary, what our western adversary continuously and persistently is wanting to do to us. And to some extent, they have been successful. In large number of cases, our proactive measures, our constant vigil has ensured that we remain in the clear. But the threat is ever persistent, and we cannot at any moment say that the job is done. It's an unrestricted activity where there are no ethics, there are no limits, there are no codes, and there are no morals. Whoever succeeds is the winner, and he can always justify that in the garb of disassociating himself or herself from that particular activity. So therefore, gray zone, when we talk about, and while I agree with whatever has been said so far, I will not like to differentiate the gray zone as only before conduct of any particular operation. The gray zone is existing now. It will continue if there is an open war, and it will continue even after cessation of openly declared hostilities. So along with the other domains that are available to the armed forces, cyber domain is an equally important domain. And therefore, when there was a discussion in the beginning, remarks made by Channel Kumar saying that should the armed forces have a prominent role? Yes, certainly armed forces should have a prominent role. It is our duty to defend the country. It is our duty to ensure that the enemy is not able to do anything funny with us. And whatever means are available to me, I should be in a position to deploy those means to ensure that I succeed in whatever I have to do. And so therefore, cyber and also space, since I also look after the space domain, these are two very important activities and spheres where we need to hone our skills as opposed to what we have at present. We already discussed about Defense Cyber Agency, like the Defense Space Agency and the Special Operations Group. What was thought of to be command was scaled down in the initial stages as an agency. And after 3 years, a review was to be carried out of all these three. The review of the Space Agency has already been done. I presume that Cyber Agency will also be reviewed, and so would the Special Armed Forces Division. In the services, we have the Services Cyber Group, which have been established with the necessary authorization and certification. And they are sprawling and developing organization and structures which are slowly finding their feet. And then in the civil domain, we have got multiple agencies. And this is where the problem lies. The problem is not in having civil domain agencies. The problem lies in having too many agencies trying to do the same thing. And that therefore brings me to a bit of a demarcation of what the first cyber group, some of the activities which we do or intend to do. First is deterrence, which roughly translates to the offensive capability. Protection, which obviously we do the defensive activity. Then we look at the operational support and training. Operational support in terms of doing the cyber forensics, and of course training the personnel as well as developing the infrastructure. So therefore, then I will straight come down to the points of consideration, which will in a nutshell put across whatever I have to convey. And first and foremost is here, what I talked about, too many agencies is duplication of cyber effects. There are too many people trying to do the same thing, whether it is in the armed forces, whether it is in the civil domain, whether it is NTRO, whether it is DRDO, whether it is National Cyber Security Coordinator and his team from NSCS, or it is the Army Cyber Group or the Air Force Cyber Group or the Naval Cyber Group or DCY. There are many more other agencies which I will not talk about. Everybody is trying to do his or her bit. There is no questioning that. Nobody is questioning the intent. But what is happening? This is leading to a lot of effort going in the same direction with not getting commensurate output at the end of it. And so therefore, possibly creation of a cyber command at this stage would kind of nullify that effect. It will streamline all the energies and efforts which a lot of agencies are putting in and lead us into a place where a concentrated effort in a concerted manner, in a focused approach, will lead us to the desired results in the shortest possible time. The next point I will talk about is expertise creation and retention. When I talk about expertise creation, it talks about training the personnel. General Menon also mentioned about it. It's a very, very important activity which we need to do. General Panwar also referred to it. And therefore, what I would try to say is that we need to create a separate and dedicated cadre, which is not existing, at least in the Air Force. We are working for it. We are working towards it. But the realization at certain echelons beyond the service headquarters has not dawned that this is also an important area where we need to focus. The thought process appears to be that this is not for the armed forces to take care of. There are certain other civil agencies, and that is where I think we have to make a difference. We have to put across very, very succinctly and very, very clearly to the people who matter that it is equally a responsibility of the armed forces to not only do defensive activities, which is what is largely thought of, but also to ensure that we reach and attain the offensive part in these operations. We also look at developing skills, because these skills don't come easily. And while we may say that I can always hire and fire people in the civil domain, but we need to remember there are certain activities and actions which have to be done in a continuous manner. And we have to do them in a continuous manner. We need to have similar set of people, or the same set of people who have similar understanding, who really understand what is the end state and who are able to walk the path right till the end. And so therefore, having in-service skill levels is very, very important in my perception. We next talk about infra creation and operation. Now, it may just appear, what is the big deal? We may just get some 10, 20, 50, 100 servers and do this and do that. But there is an issue in this. The moment I have to do cyber operations, I cannot do it from my established computer desktop, which is in my office. It is easily traceable. And therefore, I need to get into specialist equipment. I need to get certain servers. I need to get certain programs. I have to get into VPNs, virtual machines, and whatever you may say. The list is quite long, and I'll not like to question the intelligence of those who are attending this webinar. What is important is that we need to look at the procedures of procurement. This point has persistently been brought up, saying that if I have to follow the same procedure as I follow for purchasing a pin or a pen in my office, I think that is not going to work. Because the confidentiality of procurement of equipment related to offensive cyber operations is something which needs to be considered at every level, and therefore certain activities have to be done so that we bypass or at least streamline the manner so that the information which is contained in that requirement is not let out for a traceback to happen. I must admit at this stage that certain activities or certain steps have already been taken. Naturally, I cannot elaborate on those, but it is not a lost case. But point which needs to be understood is that we need to move further than where we are. And certain more activities are required in this manner to streamline the procedures, to facilitate anonymity while we are procuring and creating infrastructure. The next point which I want to talk about is cyber jostling. Well, like I said, everybody wanted to do the same thing at the same time. It's a dead giveaway. It's a dead giveaway. With our Western adversary, things are not too difficult. We have similar language, but it becomes a problem when we try and access our Northern adversary. Language becomes a big issue. So therefore, everybody tries to find the comfort level in the West, leaving the North to be tackled by somebody else. Because we all want to tackle the West, so everybody wants to go and target certain electricity grid or railway or things of that kind. When we try and do that, if all of us or multiple agencies land up at the same place, at the same door, at the same time, without knowing that the other person is also there, it is likely to caution the door where we are knocking and also compromise our own efforts in that direction. So therefore, cyber jostling is something which we need to avoid, and cooperation and mutual coordination is the key in that direction. Synergy between cyber agencies, of course, it flows from what I just said. Constant dialogue and exchanges, and I'm not saying it is not happening. We are talking with NTRO, for example. We are talking with DCY. We are speaking with the other cyber agencies of the other services. But we need to increase the frequency and the depth where we need to go, so that we can carry out the cyber operations in an effective manner by prioritizing what we want. Of course, by default, each service has its own priorities. On most of the occasions, they don't merge. That means each one has a separate target to attend. But there are certain common areas where we all want to target. And so that is the place where we need to have dialogue and therefore ensure that we don't mess up with the other agency. The whole of nation approach, I think this is what is the key. At the national level, we need to have clarity of what we want to do and how we want to. How we want to do that we can handle. The services can handle if the mandate is clear. But that mandate has to be given in an unambiguous manner. It cannot be left hanging. The rules of engagement, General Menon talked about it, have to be absolutely clear. There should be no ambiguity in this. And also, there has to be clarity at the higher level. It is not my intention to sully anybody's reputation, but the involvement at the top echelon is not as much as one would like to say. And I'm talking about echelons higher than the service headquarters. So clarity of purpose, single-minded dedication to achieve that objective by laying down the clear rules of engagement will take us much further than we are today. Cyber security awareness is something not directly related with offensive operations, but will lead us to build up our defenses and therefore now free time from the assets that we have to focus on the offensive operations. And of course, persistence is something which we need to take care of. It is not a fly-by-night operation. Any cyber operation, any offensive operation is not fly-by-night. It has to be consistently and persistently being followed up. If I visit some place, I need to go there again. I need to go there again after some time to see what is the result. At the same time, I cannot enter every door, otherwise I'm giving my plan. So it's a very balanced and fine activity and therefore has to be fine-tuned over a period of time. In conclusion, I would like to say that today we have certain amount of capability. It is not that we don't have any capability at all. At the same time, we need to develop that capability much more than what is existing. Clearly, in a collaborative manner, without stepping on anybody's toes. And there is a very big case for the cyber agency to develop into a cyberspace command. Objectivity, synergy, and whole of nation approach is the key to maximize returns with the available infrastructure and resources if you have to be effective in the future. With that, I'll close my case. I once again thank the host and General Panwar and General Murthy and the audience for giving me a patient sharing and giving me an opportunity. Thank you very much, Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, Avim Ranade. There's a very large number of important aspects that you brought out. I'm sure the audience and anybody listening to these episodes will gather a lot from what you just stated. I would like to highlight two of those aspects which I found require a lot of deliberation. One is related to what you mentioned as the gray zone activities happening here, and there are no morals and scruples, and it will continue now and subsequently after an all-out conflict. So the ethics part of it, the morals, as plays into this game. So the issue is, I mean, I also mentioned in my opening remarks that as of now, in the absence of relevant international law on the subject as to how international law applies in cyberspace, cyberspace is more like a Wild West because of problems of attribution, etc. That is why anybody and everybody is doing whatever they wish to. I am actually visualizing a scenario as to if we have to translate international law into cyberspace, how would it look like? In fact, certain principles have already been accepted during the GGs that international law applies in cyberspace. Only the modalities in which it applies is to be worked out. It is still being worked out by the nations. It will take its own time, maybe a decade or so for it to actually materialize. But the aspect is that in the gray zone, if the armed forces are getting into the picture, they have to, or any nation attacking the adversary's critical infrastructure or anything in a sovereign state, it has to be with an objective. It can't be, cyber criminals, of course, have their own objective. If China does something to India, it has to be with a certain objective, even in gray zone. It can't be that, okay, just because you can attack, the transportation network, they will just do it. So nobody is going to do it just like that. It will be with an objective. And that objective will dovetail into the strategic requirements which are there and not be just done off the cuff, so to say. So this whole aspect of being a Wild West, with time, I feel that it will get resolved over a period of time. And we have to look at a scenario that when it is resolved, as and when it is resolved, in which direction we move, and so the formulation of the cyber plane and the distribution of charters, especially to the armed forces, which is a morally upright force, it cannot function in an unethical manner. So the mandate has to be allocated accordingly. And my opening remarks and overall thought process is to decide on, under the realm of international law, what should be the distribution of charters. That's the main thing. And the second aspect is this aspect of cyber jostling and too many people. And so there should be a cyber command and a correct delineation of charters so that there is no confusion. Yes, that is the primary thing that we are trying to discuss. And I see, for example, no reason why an R&D organization like DRDO should be actually involved in offensive cyber attacks. I see no rationale at all for that. So it is happening because of this non-clarity in the charters itself, and anybody and everybody is doing it. So this is what needs to be sorted out. Anyway, with those short comments, I think we'll move on to Commodore Anil Kumar to get a naval perspective. The floor is yours, Commodore Anil.
Thank you very much, sir. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I would like to thank General Panwar and CASA for giving me this opportunity to speak on this subject that is very close to my heart, that is cyber, and from a naval perspective. Now, I know I'm the last speaker, and this is not the first time I'm being the last speaker. That this is a slot that I normally get, and from experience, I know that by the time it comes to your turn, most of the things that you can speak about has already been covered. And I've got 10 minutes left, so I would stick to what I can really speak about in this time, which nobody else could have covered. That is the cyber from a purely naval perspective, as to how it contributes to our operations and stuff like that. The naval environment, it's quite different from that of land, and that is not just because there is water everywhere. It is also because there are no lines of control or demarcated borders in the sea, and the seas are open to all. There is freedom of navigation by law, except for territorial seas that extend to 12 nautical miles from the coast. The seas belong to everyone. Therefore, at sea, in addition to enemy forces, we also have a multitude of others: merchant ships, fishing boats, offshore support vessels, and multinational forces. It is in all this confusion that naval war takes place, and we better be sure who we are firing at, because if it is not the enemy, then we may have hell to pay. So the war at sea is not just about detecting enemy units, but more about identifying them correctly before carrying out any kind of weapon engagements at sea. Now what's happened is the missile ranges have been steadily increasing, and today we have missiles which go 300 kilometers, 400 kilometers. And the enemy also has similar kind of missiles. So it is very important that we fire first, for obvious reasons, before the enemy can fire at us. However, because of the curvature of the earth, the ship's integral sensors cannot see very far. They can see, say, 80 kilometers, 100 kilometers, but not beyond that. So to fire our missiles at 300 kilometers, we would definitely require targeting data from other sources, that is from other platforms. Today, this information exchange is carried out over networks, and this has irreversibly changed the way we conduct our operations at sea. I will explain this a little more. Today, we use terms like network-enabled operations, network-centric operations, when we use networks to conduct our operations at sea. Our operational network has terrestrial, satellite, and radio segments which are interconnected, and they transfer a great deal of information. To facilitate detection and identification, we aggregate information from a variety of sources and analyze it. Sensor data is fused from other available information, and the common operational picture is generated, and that is made available to all the operational units and command centers. This is also referred to as Maritime Domain Awareness, or MDA. In addition, all command and control orders are also exercised over these networks. We have thus become dependent on networks for conduct of warfare. In the information age that we are in, information superiority will decide the outcome of battles. Terms like information warfare, network-centric warfare, and the Chinese informatization have existed for over 20 years now. But in essence, all these are about ensuring that our information is available to the right unit at the right time while degrading the enemy's effort to do so. Ladies and gentlemen, because all information of the Navy flows over networks, protecting our networks and attacking adversary networks has become part and parcel of the operations at sea. So cyber warfare is not a separate fifth dimension as far as Navy is concerned, but an integral part of the operational planning and execution at all levels. That is my first point. To have maritime domain awareness, we collect information from diverse sources, and these are not strictly military. For example, we get public domain information such as the AIS, that is the Automatic Identification System, which is the identification system for merchant ships, and ADS-B, which is the identification tool for commercial aircraft over the internet. And there are commercial satellite services today, not only for high-speed data transfer, such as what Elon Musk is doing, but also for imagery and even electronic warfare, that is ESM. It is now possible to simply subscribe to these services on a commercial basis. So when we talk of naval warfare today, it is a system of systems that is required to be protected. And it's a system of systems of the adversary that we need to attack. And these are not exclusively military networks. Some use public infrastructure and commercial systems and so on. Therefore, as far as the Navy is concerned, cyber warfare is not limited excuse me, my computer went off. Sorry. So when we talk of naval warfare today, it's a system of systems that is required to be protected, and it's a system of systems of the adversary that we need to attack, and these are not exclusively military networks. Some use public infrastructure and are commercial systems and so on. So cyber warfare, as the Navy is concerned, is not limited to purely naval systems, but covers many other public and commercial systems. So when we talk of capability building in cyber, it is not only about protecting and attacking the Navy's exclusive networks and infrastructure, but also about protecting and attacking all these other systems that facilitate domain awareness and contribute to conduct of naval operations. And that is my second point. Next is about the mindset with respect to offensive cyber operations. I don't really know why, but the term used in India is deterrence operations. This, in my opinion, is wrong, because deterrence of any kind would require demonstrated capability, which is very difficult in the cyber domain. But that's not my point. We tend to look at cyber with a traditional, may I say, kinetic mindset. We try to force fit terms like cyber weapons and cyber targets, and we talk of target assignments and fratricide as if we were capturing a hill or something. But the cyber environment is borderless and limitless, somewhat like the sea. When we talk of offensive cyber operations, reaching any particular network node inside enemy territory may require compromising many systems that lead to it. So we cannot be segregating targets into strategic, operational, and tactical ones, or allocating targets the way we are doing now. And because we need to establish footholds in adversary systems during peacetime, offensive cyber operations will remain an ongoing process all the time. This is very different from conventional warfare. That is my third point. Some cyber activities associated with information superiority in the battle space will apply to purely naval systems, and this will be done at the field level. But some activities will go beyond this, and this will require a concerted approach amongst cyber forces. The point I'm trying to make here is that coordination and control of offensive cyber operations beyond the battle space will have to be done centrally. General Kumar had spoken about the capability, Indian capability, and vis-a-vis the Chinese capability. In fact, in that particular report, by the Belfer Center, there is a graph which shows capability versus intent. China comes second in terms of capability and highest in terms of intent. India, of course, lags way behind. Like many other countries, including the US, we have had many instances of cyber attacks on Indian systems by the Chinese. The last one was the intrusion by the Red Echo group into the power grid in Maharashtra last year, as reported by Recorded Future. We know that the PLA-SSF established in 2015 is a large and capable force with elements down to the field level. We also need a large and capable cyber organization to counter that. And our present fragmented piecemeal approach will not do. There are too many agencies and there is too little coordination. I think this point has been brought out very clearly by all speakers. To summarize what I have said thus far, because of the critical role that is played by networks in modern naval warfare, cyber has become an integral part of naval operations. It is not being treated anymore as a separate fifth dimension. This is more or less the case with other systems, other services as well. Naval operations are dependent on information that is collated, analyzed, and disseminated through a variety of channels, including public and commercial ones. Cyber operations are therefore not limited to purely naval systems, and because cyberspace is seamless and without boundaries, there is a need to look at the issue of cyber holistically. We know that China has considerable capability in cyber warfare, and we've had many instances in the past when the Chinese have intruded into Indian cyberspace. With that, I have two recommendations for capability building. Firstly, the Navy Cyber Group should continue to build capability to protect the Navy's cyber infrastructure and to ensure information superiority at sea. I believe that human capital is the most important asset, and we need to induct and train cyber warriors in large numbers. But beyond that, there is the immediate need to consolidate our capabilities in offensive operations. For this, existing silos and turfs will need to be broken, and all national resources should be pooled under one agency. As warfare is the business of the armed forces, offensive cyber operations must be controlled by the armed forces only. While we could outsource some jobs such as exploit development to private agencies, operations against adversary systems should be done only by Defense Cyber Agency and services cyber groups. So my second recommendation is that we need to expand the charter of Defense Cyber Agency to make it the central agency for coordinating and conducting offensive cyber operations. We need to immediately upgrade Defense Cyber Agency to a full-fledged cyber command. We need to have adequate trained staff. I would emphasize on the word trained staff because just simply allocating staff is not good enough. They need to be trained because cyber is a very, very complex and multi-dimensional kind of domain, and that requires a lot of training. We also need clear policies and, most importantly, trust that enable and empower the cyber command to conduct full spectrum operations through peace and war. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I thank CASA and General Panna once again for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Commodore Anil Kumar. I think with your inputs and perspectives which have been given, embedded in the naval backdrop, the point that there is a need for a central agency and that you have unequivocally recommending that it should be offensive cyber operation, should be the domain of the armed forces, and the need for cyber command and the need for proper capability development, where you have highlighted the aspect that as far as capability development is concerned, it is not just the hiring which will do the job. A structured training within the services required is an extremely important point which has been brought out. Thank you very much. And with that, I think we will move to looking at the question answers which are there in the session, and I will try and summarize after the question answer session. I find some questions have been removed.
No, sir, I think they have been answered live. So there are a couple of them that have gone into the answered section. Do you want to take the open ones of General Daljit Singh, Santosh, Khadsare, and the others? You could take those three first.
Okay, yeah, I'll take these. But I saw earlier there were 5 and I saw some of them also.
Yep. They have gone into the answered section on the top. If you see the answered tab, I'm not sure on your phone screen of this.
Well, I'm unable to see that. Anyway, let me.
No, just click on that, Panwar. You will get it. You see open within brackets 5 and answered within brackets 2 and dismissed. You click on answered, you get it.
Click on
answered.
That's
open,
okay.
answered.
answered. Okay.
Answered. They just
I see. Sorry. I
Yeah.
was missing those tabs. I'm not very used to this. Okay. Understood. Right. So let's look at the unanswered ones then. So the first one, which I would like to take on, is by Daljit Singh, which says effective and actionable cyber intelligence is crucial for offensive cyber operations, as cyber vulnerabilities and trapdoors may close anytime which would make offensive cyber ineffective. At what level updated cyber intelligence is ensured, and it is hoped that it gets disseminated in time. I think this is somewhat related to the type of issue which General Menon was trying to mention. That was it General Menon who mentioned that you have to get the excesses at the right time, or there would be some conflict. Or was it AVM Ranade who was mentioning that, General Menon? So would you like to answer this one?
Yeah,
How do access and cyber intelligence dovetails into offensive cyber operations? That's where the question is targeting.
Yes, sir. There is a dichotomy here, sir. What we generally find is that when you have to have a good cyber-enabled operations going, we got to have an effective and a credible intelligence on your side. And to have the intelligence, that preparation will start for a long period of time. It has to be done well in advance. And you may have to tap certain resources to get this intelligence so that you can wage cyber-enabled operations at the time of your choosing. But while you're doing that, what I mentioned earlier was that many of these resources we was looking for getting information that is in the realm of cyber espionage. These network administrators will get alarmed, cautioned, and then these resources will dry up. These resources will dry up. So there is always a dichotomy between gaining intelligence for cyber-enabled operation, at the same time gaining information in the realm of the cyber espionage, that is getting information for per se surveillance requirement. That is a point which I was mentioning, and that is something which one has to do it in a very coordinated effort, and that has to be done at the highest level. Otherwise, we will have some fratricide wherein our own source will get dry up. So that is a point which I wanted to highlight on this particular aspects.
Yeah, sure. I think that should be answering the type of question which has been raised. Okay, let's move on to the next one, which I find an interesting and useful one, where Santosh Khatsare says that we do have a Budapest Convention on Cybercrime. I think India has not signed that convention, if I'm not wrong, but do not have any international cyber law on cyber attacks or cyber war. How do you think we as a country can contribute to address this issue? Now, this I think is related to all the GG meetings and all which have been going on. There are several efforts internationally. So, AVM Ranade or Commodore Anil, Commodore Anil Kumar, any of you who have been following the happenings on the international cyber law front, would you like to take it on?
Sir, there has been discussion going on this, but there is nothing concrete which has happened till now. Because finally, when somebody signs such a treaty, they are tying their own hands because the other countries are at liberty not to sign, and so therefore it is an area which is anybody's guess as to when it will make progress and if it will make progress at all. That's all I would like to say at this stage.
Would you like to add anything to that, Commodore Anil?
Yes. I've got there are two aspects to this actually. So one is what even Ranade just spoke about, that there's no consensus amongst countries as to what where does cyber crime end and where does cyber operations start, what is military, what is not military. Although there have been a large number of GG meetings, nobody's really been able to make any headway on that because everybody is reserving their capabilities and not showing it out in any case. That is the first part. And the second part is about attributability of blame, because nobody attacks from their own IP address. They are always attacking through some VPNs and some server VPS, which are, and nowadays people are doing it through roving VPS. I mean, that is not even limited to one country. It is roving across the world. So at the end of the day, attributability becomes an issue, and since we cannot prove conclusively as to who could have originated a particular attack, it would be difficult to really bring in any legislature in that either. So that's what I think.
Okay, maybe I could add a couple of things to that. I have a little more positive outlook towards this. Although I fully agree that it's a very long drawn and agreements in this area are very slowly forthcoming, so to say. But there has been some limited progress which has been made over the years. In fact, since 2004, when the first group of government experts meeting was held, thereafter several of them, the sixth one was held, I think, in 2020 or 2021. Now, the important ones in between where a set of principles was agreed to were the GG meetings in 2013 and 15. A set of principles was agreed upon, principles for applicability, and it was agreed, the general idea was that it was agreed that international law applies in cyberspace. How it applies is a matter to be deliberated upon and identified. Another of the principles which is there is that nations should not attack each other's critical infrastructure. There are about 10 or 11 principles which are there. I'm just highlighting a couple of issues which were there. And while these GGs are attended by only a small group of countries, the P5 countries are present in all the GGs. But as far as the others are concerned, it's on a sort of a rotation representation basis. India has also been participating. But the 2015 GG recommendations were accepted by the UN General Assembly in 2015 itself, and further endorsed and enhanced, so to say, in 2021. There's another effort which is going on, which has now been started at the behest of, at the initiation of Russia actually, is an open-ended working group where all participants of the UN are involved in this. So that's a more democratic sort of setup to tackle similar issues. And their recommendations are more or less on similar lines, but the processes are different. The important part, I think the question which is being asked is, how do you think we as a country can contribute to address this issue? So what I gather from the question is that we as a nation should be proactively participating in these forums. Firstly, having our own strategy. The aspect of strategy has been brought out by more than one speaker today. And so if we have our own clarity of thought and thereafter impose or sort of try to progress our own thought process and get them included in these international conventions which are there for deciding on how cyber law should work at the international level. So that's what I would like to add here.
May I
Okay, so yeah.
Sir, General Menon wanted to add a point.
Yeah, please, General Menon.
Yeah, so I have an additional supplementary view on the subject. Firstly, sir, there are 57 countries who are party to this Budapest Convention. And therefore, India now, at the time of this convention when it started, India may not be that strong in the field of cyber. But today we have come a long way. And therefore, is it not the time ripe for us to join the convention? Number one. The advantage which we can accrue out of it is that firstly, 57 countries, right now India is having bilateral talks and bilateral discussions on the cyber domain with many countries which are part of the Budapest Convention. So if you have built upon that and thereafter establish the bilateral discussions with these countries, go and be a signatory to this Budapest Convention, and thereafter build up the strategic allies in the cyber field. That would be the approach which as a country we should take it forward. Maybe an answer to that query which was posed by that offices.
I fully agree with you, General Menon, as to the approach which you are trying to say with respect to the Budapest Convention. In fact, a lot of people feel that way, that we should have our own from bilateral, we should use to multilateral, create a sort of a consensus, and then influence the deliberations which are taking at the UN level. But we must remember that this Budapest Convention has to do with cybercrime, whereas our focus today is not cybercrime, but applicability in terms of sovereignty as it applies to cyberspace. That's really the central point. So Budapest Convention really doesn't apply in our case. But the process which you said is, I completely agree, that's the sort of action which our country needs to take. Sorry. Okay. Another question is by Colonel Nair. I'm not too sure. We raised this has come up in an earlier episode. Also, we raised the technical support division where General V.K. Singh was our chief under the MI Directorate. It was hastily disbanded following sustained hostile media reports. Does that fiasco still influence our activities relating to offensive cyber operations? So Okay. Gentlemen, would you like to look at this?
No comments, sir.
Okay. Firstly, it is not even related to the cyber field. That's
Sir.
a totally different domain, which was MI and the types of intelligence. So
Um,
it has not much to do with the cyber domain and not much to do with
General Panwar, let's pass this question, please.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Thank you.
Okay. My question pertains to central execution, but there's no question there.
So you want to take the earlier one from General Daljit Singh? Effective and actionable and cyber intelligence is crucial for offensive cyber operations.
We've already seen that. We've already tackled that.
Okay. Then the next one is from Colonel Manoj Chanan.
Chanan, yeah. Okay, this is a good one, which I think while has been dealt with by the respective panelists, but I think we can deliberate a little more on this. Are the armed forces training cyber warriors centrally or service-wise from basics to the highest level operation? So he's wanting to know what is the current efforts being made in a little more specific than what has been covered. So we can have views of all the three panelists on this, starting with maybe General Menon.
Yes, sir.
Don't throw the ball in my court.
Yes. So when we talk about the cyber training, sir, I would consider this as a training at the various levels. Firstly, the cyber training will have to have it at the highest level, wherein you can have it at the commanders or the leaders level. Then you can have a second type of cyber expertise required at the specialist or the people who are the experts, we call it. That's the training which is required. And the third is the level of executioners, that is the cyber warriors, you may call it that way. So these are available in all three services, whether it is Army, Navy, and Air Force. These three levels exist. Now, to carry out the training, one of the major recommendations, which I think I should have covered in my script or in my talk earlier, is that we need to go in for a joint service training for cyber. That is my recommendation. Right now, we are all having independent training being carried out. I take an analogy of this with the electronic warfare course, which is being run for the specifically for the services. And also there is one JEW, sir, Joint Electronic Warfare course, which is run for at the tri-service level. I have been closely associated with the training of both the type of category of this training when I was in service. And I find, and I personally experienced as an instructor and also as a student, that this joint level training in the electronic warfare, which is also a very highly skilled, technologically very advanced operations which we carry out in that field also. Therefore, the training also is of that standard. The joint level training has a tremendous impact on the uptake and knowing what the other services do. While we have a joint training carried out at each level, whether at the cyber warrior level or at the middle level or at the high level, then you can have your own charter and then perform the task as it fits in for the respective services, duly under the supervision of the DCA right now and subsequently in the Cyber Command. That is the approach which I would recommend. We can have the views of the other panelists also, sir.
So joint training is actively being discussed. The JEWC, what General Menon was referring to, is now conducted by the Air Force on a permanent basis. It used to be conducted on a rotational basis earlier when General Menon was in service. In the last 2 years, in fact, we have now taken a decision that the Air Force will continue to conduct the JEWC as a Air Force activity for all three services. As far as the training is concerned, sir, what we do is that we generally get together with DCYA, that is Defense Cyber Agency, at least the Air Force Cyber Group, and I'm sure Naval Cyber Group as well, since we all are here in Delhi. So there is a regular exchange of information, there is a regular exchange of technique, there is a regular exchange of best practices, and we are progressively moving towards more joint training. It is very difficult at this moment for me to spell out since it's a work in progress. But I think this part has very well been understood by the three services, and therefore Headquarter IDS is the nodal agency through DCYA who is working in this direction. I don't want to give out any more contours at this stage. Like I said, since it's work in progress, but I think it is something which is very well appreciated and a lot of work is going on in that direction.
Commodore Anil?
Sir, I quite agree with what General Menon had said about joint training. Having one central agency which can do this high level of training is probably required. As of now, we are doing it on an individual basis. But there are two aspects to it, sir. One is that we already are exchanging some students to these tri-services institutions. Like we send people to the Air Force also, and there's likewise an exchange from the Air Force and the Army for our courses as well. So there's a limited amount of exchange that's already happening, but we need to bring it much higher. And the second aspect is that when we carry out this training at various levels, at what General Menon had spoken about, there's one level of cyber protection, which is a much larger number of people which need to be trained, and that is specific to the kind of systems that a particular service is using. For example, the naval networks are protected by communication officers and sailors, so they will need specific training on those particular stuff. So when it comes to cyber security, when you talk of levels of training, they may have to have a demarcation as to what is the kind of joint services training that we can actually do, and what is it that services will have to do on their own. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll also add my bit to this one because this is very important, and I've been involved in cyber training as Commandant MCT. So the aspect of having it in a joint manner is endorsed by all of us, I think, and it is possibly very much required. Because of the specialist nature, if we try to create infrastructure and facilities service-wise, it will be extremely difficult because getting such a specialist sort of a center of excellence, so to say, would be difficult to achieve within each service. At the same time, as far as the cyber security part is concerned, what Commodore Anil was trying to say, that in any case has to be done within the respective services, because that's a lower level, lesser level of specialization, and that has to be system specific. So that has to be done. Now, the point which I wanted to highlight was from a overall perspective. There was this view which I said in the opening remarks. There are certain people who feel what is that offensive cyber warfare is so specialized that it is beyond the capabilities of the armed forces. Now, since the time is a little short, I will not take individual views on this, but I personally feel, having gone through the process, and in fact, we have created a cyber operations course, at least within the Corps of Signals. There's a cyber operations course which is running. So having dealt with this, I feel it's very much within the feasibility of doing this training within the services, provided the right focus and the charter for doing it is given to the services. So that's one. It should be done on joint basis. I fully agree with that. And the other aspect which I want to highlight is the whole range of skills which are required. There's a whole pyramid of skills which is required to be developed. So maybe at the higher end of it, certain types of things can be done in conjunction with expertise which is available with the civil, at least in the interim. But as time goes along, the services are very well capable of taking on this task. There's nothing really, as they say, no real rocket science involved. It is a very specialist involved. Okay, I think.
Sir, can we jump to the first question?
Yeah, I know. So I'm coming to that only. I saw that last one. So
interesting on
the first question which was raised by Daljit Singh was, how will the armed forces synchronize or synergize kinetic offensive operations with offensive cyber operations for effective impact? At what tactical or strategic level will such synergy be possible? Probably the assumption here is that offensive cyber operations are being thought of, and some of us have also indicated that they should be centralized, etc. So how would you, coordinate at the tactical or strategic level? Now, before we answer this question, we also have to look at the tactical level, what sort of offensive cyber operations would you like to carry on? So I think we'll start in the reverse order. If you have some views on this, Commodore Anil. Synchronization of tactical cyber and kinetic operations, multi-domain operations.
So, sir, as I had spoken as part of my talk, in the Navy, all our information exchange is happening over networks today, and therefore attacking a tactical radio network or a satellite network is more of a tactical requirement for the Navy as far as naval operations are concerned. So which is why I said that it is not really possible to demarcate between tactical, operational, and strategic, because the lines that lead to a tactical system may be through some strategic networks. So it would not be possible to actually differentiate that way. But that having been said, sir, the other aspect is that, for example, if we have to bring down the power supply to a particular satellite ground station, now that cannot be a job which is given to any specific service. If the requirement arises of that nature, of attacking some critical information infrastructure, which leads to, which is connected to operations, there has to be coordination and control at the highest level, and that is why I said that it has to be done centrally by the Defense Cyber Agency. So when such a task comes up of bringing down the power supply to a satellite station, that has to be done by the central agency at the Defense Cyber Agency, rather than being left to the tactical commanders. That's what I think, sir.
I'm actually looking at the time, and I think CASA is pretty strict about its timing. So I think I'll just wrap up this answer by referring to something what General Menon brought out, is centralized control, decentralized execution. So if Commodore Anil has just brought out that there would be requirements at the tactical level, it's not that all offensive cyber operations are of a strategic nature. There would be requirements at the operational and tactical levels also. And so they have to be executed at that, because the requirements will emanate from there. But as long as the control is centralized and execution, possibly that is one model, but it is a complex area. And as and when we graduate, I suppose modalities will work out. I think we don't have time for any more questions, and I think most of them have already been answered. So with that, I would say I would wrap up here. I will not try and summarize. I think most of the aspects have been very well discussed also. So I would, the one or two things which I definitely would like to say at the end is that the requirement of immediately coming up with a cyber command and the importance of capability development within the services at the joint services level. These are two important, I think, consensus views, which are emerging not only from the previous episode, but also from this episode. So I'll stop there and I'll hand over the floor to General Murthy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, General Panwar, and thank you, panelists, for a fascinating webinar. This really, we fleshed out what India requires, what our services require. In fact, this entire series has been an eye-opener for many of us. There is no doubt that we need to get our act together. And what we would be doing is that my good friend and colleague, friend from yesteryears, Colonel Ravi Nair, who's also a participant here and a member of our core committee, has been painstakingly putting together summaries of all our webinars. And after he puts together the summary of this webinar, we'll request General Panwar to sort of take out the important recommendations, which we will flag to the government, and it is up to the government to take it from there. That's what I'd like to say. Thank you very much, General Suresh Menon, Air Vice Marshal Makaran Ranade, and Commodore MP Anil Kumar for your presence here today and for sharing your recommendations on this difficult, sensitive subject, and for taking on those questions, some of them very direct. I thought you've all three of you have done a fabulous job. Thank you, General Panwar, for sort of curating this entire episode from first to the fourth and moderating every session with great clarity of thought and with a lot of effort. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Mr. Mahadev and Shankar. You've been a pillar of strength, as I've said, to me and CASA, and for helping me conduct this webinar. Thank you, Ravi Nair, Colonel Ravi Nair, for putting together the summaries. Above all, I thank Team CASA, Ms. Barnali Singha Roy, our technical assistant, whose invaluable support has made this webinar and other webinars take place. And last but not the least, thank you participants for your patient hearing on a Sunday evening to be with us. And on the eve of Independence Day, all it remains for me is to say Jai Hind, and for the 75 years of our independence, we hope for a bright and a wonderful future for our country. Jai Hind, and thank you all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir.